shared with individuals after today's presentation. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation and on the slides you will receive. So you'll be able to contact me, myself, or Emily, or Jennifer for the recording, and we'll be able to get that to you as well. So we do have this is a part of a 12-part training series that is designed to enhance your knowledge and overall injury risks and protective factors, and to communicate prevention strategies and recommendations to the people you serve. So on the screen, we do have today's abusive head trauma, paid family medical leave, and reproductive care resource training, as well as future trainings that will be happening until the end of April 2023. They take place on Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to 12:30, and the landing page that is on the screen, as well as the website used to register for this training itself, can help you register for upcoming trainings. So on today's agenda, we do have abusive head trauma. So we're going to learn an understanding of what abusive head trauma is, understanding and effectively responding to an infant crying, self-care during times of parental stress, and selecting support and supporting for safe caregivers. So I'm going to go ahead and share those slides, and we can go ahead and get started. Let me know if that worked. Is it sharing? Perfect. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Anita, for joining us today.
Great. Thank you so much, and welcome, everyone. My name is Anitza Guadarrama-Tiernan, and I'm a training consultant for the Children's Trust. I'm delighted to be with you this morning and with the rest of the presenters. You're going to hear some really great information. Next slide, please. Great. So today we are really going to be spending a few minutes talking about abusive head trauma. And I realize and recognize that 20 minutes is not long enough to really dive deeply into the abusive head trauma prevention topic. So what we're going to give you some top of the waves information, but also give you access to the All Babies Cry, which is a media-based parenting program that has a lot of the detailed information about each of the strategies that I will be talking about this morning, as well as the research and the information around this topic. But my hope is that at the end of the 20 minutes, you will be able to feel more comfortable understanding and talking about the definition, causes, and consequences of abusive head trauma, that you will start learning some strategies or identifying strategies to engage parents of young children in a strength-based way as it relates to understanding and responding to infant crying, and that you begin to feel confident about facilitating these conversations with parents around infant crying. Next slide, please. Great. I always think it's very important that we recognize that talking about abusive head trauma can be triggering for many of us. So I encourage you to take care of yourself and your well-being. And this is during the training and also afterwards. So if you need to connect to a supervisor or to a colleague or a peer, please make sure that you take care of yourself. Next slide, please. Great. So before we get started, it's important that we review the definition of abusive head trauma. And this definition was updated as of 2018. And I will read it because I think it is very important that we all have the same clear understanding. Abusive head trauma, which includes shaken baby syndrome, is a preventable and severe form of physical child abuse that results in an injury to the brain of a child. Abusive head trauma often happens when a parent or caregiver becomes angry or frustrated because of a child's crying. It is caused by violent, shaken, and or blunt impact. And there are two things that I want to call up from this definition. One is that it's preventable, and that's what we're here today. We are here to learn about strategies and tips that we can share with parents and with caregivers so that they can address and prepare for those periods of infant crying, right? So it's preventable. And the other piece is that it is the result of a loss of momentary control. For many parents, as we have heard through the research, they lose control in a moment of high stress. So how can we mitigate those moments of stress? How can we prepare for that? So this is a lot of anticipatory guidance that we can provide as professionals to families of young infants so that they can be better equipped to address these periods of infant crying. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk a little bit about data. I'm going to talk a little bit about the national data, and then Alexandra is going to talk a little bit more about the Massachusetts data. But nationally, it's important that we remember that approximately 1,300 children in the U.S. sustain injuries attributed to abuse each year. And most of them are less than a year old. So we know that abusive head trauma is the leading cause of physical child abuse death in children under 5. We also know, as I just mentioned, that most of the victims are less than a year old, and that the fatality is about 25% of the cases. So even though it might seem like, oh, that's not a lot, when you think about the numbers and you think about the impact of these injuries, it's a huge number that we have to consider. Next slide, please.
Okay. So for some Massachusetts specific data surrounding abusive head trauma, specifically from the year 2010 to 2019, there were 16 traumatic brain injury deaths from ages 0 to 24 months. So the highest among this, of the 16 deaths that occurred in Massachusetts, half, so 50%, occurred from infants 0 to 6 months of age. 56.6% occurred among infants of white non-Hispanic. And though the highest rate was for the white non-Hispanic, it still does occur in Hispanic, Asian, non-Hispanic, and Black non-Hispanic populations. And 56.3% of the traumatic brain injury deaths were among those of males. And a majority of the suspects in this case were the caregivers and related to death. And then specifically for hospitalizations, abusive head trauma hospitalizations were the highest among, again, the infants 0 to 6 months of age, females, and then there was a high rate for the Hispanic populations. And then through the data that we gathered with our team from, again, this 2016 to 2020 combined data, residents in the Worcester County area seem to have the highest rates of hospitalization. And there's something that I do just want to quickly mention is that this is not something that we want to blame particularly on the families. It's the systems that have been set in place that make it harder for people of color and just people in general to get access to the knowledge and the care to help reduce abusive head trauma.
Thank you, Alexandria. So now that we talk a little bit about the numbers and a little bit about the definition, let's think about the facts about abusive head trauma or shaken baby syndrome. An abusive head trauma can cause serious injuries, as you see here on the left side. We've talked a little bit already that about 25% of the victims, or the cases end in fatality. For those that do not end in fatalities, they live with lifelong disabilities and challenges, and some of them are listed on the left side of the screen here, which is important for us to keep in mind. And the other thing that we've learned through the research is that, not all of the cases obviously are reported. So you may be working with families where the child is displaying or presenting with some of these challenges, and it might be very difficult to identify. Again, not to say that if a child identified or presents with some of these disabilities or challenges, that is a consequence, a direct consequence of abusive head trauma. But again, it's some of the things that we have learned through documentation and research. I want to talk a little bit about the victims. So we talked already that they are usually very young children, that between 3 and 8 months of age is usually where the risk is highest. And we'll talk about the fact that that is where those periods of crying really, really increase for parents, for children, and therefore increasing the stress on the parents. We know through research that male infants are common victims or have a higher risk of becoming victims. And the biggest point the most important point that I want to highlight here is that most of the victims have shown signs of repeated shaken or repeating abusive head trauma. So by the time the child goes to the hospital, there are some medical tests that could determine whether or not this is something that has happened before instead of just a one-time occurrence, which again highlights the importance of creating support system and support plans for families. Next slide, please. Great. So let's talk a little bit about the perpetrators here. And what the research has shared with us is that the majority of them are male. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But usually, as Alexandra pointed out, the perpetrators is a parent or a caregiver. For the purposes of my presentation today, I will use parent and caregiver interchangeably, okay? But what we know is 65 to 90% are male. We also know that a lot of times, if it's a male, it may be the baby's father or the mother's boyfriend or husband. And for those that are caretakers, if it's female, usually it's the baby's mom or a babysitter or a child care provider. That is what we know of the data. We also have heard some data points around older siblings that have been taking care of the children and have not had the knowledge or the skills to really address that infant crying or those periods of high stress. Next slide, please. So I want to pause for a moment and talk a little bit more about males as perpetrators and thinking about why are men at greater risk. And I'm going to ask you to participate, if you can, in a very short popcorn activity. And I would like for you to put in the chat, why do you think that men might be at risk? Why do you think that the numbers may display males as a higher number of perpetrators for abusive hit trauma? And we'll just take about 10 seconds. Why might be that such a large representation of perpetrators are males? Rougher, okay, great. Less patience, don't care for a child as often. Less socialized, acclimated to deal with tears. Yeah, absolutely. Say a few more. Have less tools to deal with stress. They think it's a game, maybe trying to distract children. Absolutely. They easily get frustrated. Yeah. And these are all great answers. And I would say that, you know, as a society, we have not provided space or created space or enough space for men to take care of children and to become nurturers, right? It's a way that we have socialized our communities. Now, I will say we are moving forward in being more proactive and intentional in providing dads and males with an opportunity to bond and also to nurture and care for children. But traditionally, our society has not focused on dads as caregivers. So the socialization piece is huge here. And it's really important that as providers, we do not just look at that data point and create a negative outlook or a negative perspective towards dads. To me, what this data says is that it's even more important for us to include dads in all of our work with young families, in all of our work with moms and young infants, whether or not dad and mom are together, but to be very intentional about including dad in those conversations, in that education piece and in that support piece. Next slide, please. We know that men can be amazing fathers and caregivers. The research is showing that when they are provided with the opportunity to develop those skills and to practice those skills. And this has some benefits really for all three, right? For mom, for baby, and for dad himself, right? So when you think about it, you can have to think about the research and what it says about how important it is to have a dad present in the life of a child for their development, for their temperament, for their coping skills, and for their empathy levels. And that's just for the baby. The same thing happens to dad. When dad or a male caregiver has an opportunity to provide nurturing and safe care for children, their own confidence level increases, their own levels of empathy and nurturing increases. And for moms, we know that what a great help is to have that dad, that husband, that caregiver, or that male relative take care of a child when they have to actually go to work or do other things or help take care of the baby when other children are present. So we know that having a positive and safe environment for children where dad is able to engage in those positive relationships benefits all three. Please, next slide. Great. One more thing I want to say about dads is you are going to have access to the Oh Babies Cry, the materials, the booklet, all of that at the end. And one thing that I like to point out is that 70% of the visuals in those videos include dads in a positive interaction with a young child. They're utilizing coping skills, showing empathy, and nurture. So if you work with dads, I would highly encourage you to engage them in conversation and in role modeling activities and in showing the video and then breaking it down and talking with them. Where are some areas that you feel like you are really confident and prepared? And then there might be some areas that you want to develop, that you want to explore as you think about and plan on taking care of a young baby. So we talked a little bit about kind of the statistics and the demographics of abusive head trauma. Let's start thinking about understanding and effectively responding to infant crying. So go ahead and let's move on to the next slide. Here's another popcorn activity. In the chat, why do you think babies cry? What might be a reason that babies cry? We'll take about 10 seconds. Hunger, absolutely, came up right away. Tired, yes. Any kind of distress, absolutely. Absolutely. Wet, hungry, tired, overwhelmed, yes. Excellent. I love how quickly these answers are coming up, because what it tells me is that that's a very easy list to put together, right? We know that babies cry, but it's important that we understand as caregivers, but also as professionals, that babies cry is the way they communicate, right? It's the way they communicate at that time. They don't have words yet. That's how they tell their caregiver something is not right here, right? And it's important that we think about, how do we approach these periods of crying? That it's not something that the parent may have done, that is not that the baby doesn't like the parent, but it's simply, hey, something is going on, right? And we may want to think about, how do we equip parents to identify that? But also that at the end of the day, babies just cry, that nothing may be going on. They just simply cry, right? So it's important that we keep that in mind when we talk to families, because it could be really frustrating for parents to try to figure out, why is my baby crying? I've changed them. I gave them food. I'm holding them. Sometimes you have tried everything under the stars and they still cry, because that's what babies do. Next slide, please. So what's normal about crying, right? The more parents know about their baby's behavior, the more confident they will be. This is why those conversations with parents of young infants are so critical, right? What is your day like? Instead of just focusing on those periods of crying, when the baby's happy and things are going well, what's happening in the environment? How does the baby react, to strangers coming in? Or how does it react to siblings? Like, getting to know your baby's behavior and temperament would really help parents feel more confident. Crying also helps babies get the support that they need, right? It's how they let somebody knows, hey, I'm hungry. Hey, I need to be held. Hey, I'm wet, right? So every time a parent responds to their baby's cries, they learn about each other. They're able to connect to each other. And the baby gets to understand how the parent reacts. And the parent understands how the baby is communicating and connecting with them at that time. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the popcorn activity, but think about if you have ever taken care of children, or if you have children of your own, what did you do when your baby cried? How did you comfort your child? And some of us, may think about, different ways of walking the baby, from side to side, from one part of the room to the other room, maybe singing, maybe, gentle, a swaddling. So you might think of a lot of different activities or techniques that you use for comforting your baby. Next slide, please. And this is something that we want to encourage you to communicate with parents of infant children, right? That it's important that they have a series of tactics and strategies that they can try when the baby's crying that might help reduce the crying or calm the baby, but also they help the parent calm themselves as well, which is so great. And you have here 8 common strategies. These are demonstrated in the videos that you will see later on. They're also explained in the booklet that you will have access to. But these are some of the things that I bet you if I asked you to put in the chat, you would have said that maybe this is a common strategy that has worked for you. And what's important is that we provide parents with an array of strategies, not just one, because as we know, one strategy might work today, but it might not work tomorrow. So it's making sure that their toolbox is full of strategies for what works best for them and their baby. Next slide, please. As we're trying to take care of the baby and calm the baby, it's also critical that we prepare parents through self-care and that we help them develop a self-care plan. Next slide. So as we're thinking about the baby and we're thinking about, developmentally what's appropriate, some calming strategies, I also want to encourage you to have conversations with parents where you explore what works for them. What can parents do to reduce their own stress during periods of crying? What has worked for them in their life when high times of stress? And providing that anticipatory guidance, right, is getting the plan ready before it happens. So if you're working with pregnant parents, I would have a conversation with them. At some point, the baby's going to cry and might cry and cry for a long time. What could you do in those times? What works for you when you're stressed out, when you're starting to feel overwhelmed? What are some strategies that we can think about and plan? And one of the things that you will receive after the training today is a resource handout that has a space for parents to write out a plan. So if you're working with families, you can use that handout and really go through all of the strategies and identify more coping mechanisms. I also encourage you as providers to think about what you can do to help parents plan for these times of infant crying. What can we do ahead of time? Part of your work plan or your goal setting with parents should include an opportunity to plan for high stress times. Right? So again, if you're working with pregnant parents, this is a fantastic time to do that. If you're working with parents of newborns, it's a perfect time to do that as well. There is not just one time you can do it, and have those conversations and also revisit that with them. Next slide, please. This is an example, again in the booklet, again in the videos, of a very simple way that you can think with parents how to develop the self-care plan, right? You have 5 steps right here on the screen, and you can have a great conversation. You can also have this in a parenting group. And kind of put it up on a slide, put it on a newsprint, and go through each of the steps. Have them identify what works for them, right? When we think about step 2, put space between you and the crying. What does that mean? That may mean put the baby safely in their crib and take a walk outside of that room, go to the kitchen where you can still be accessible, but it gives you a moment to breathe, right? So think through with parents, what are the strategies that they can use and they can pre-plan to address these moments of crying. Go ahead into the next slide, please. A point that I want to make sure that we remember is that parents that are dealing with, addressing, impacted by the life challenges listed on this slide need a little bit of extra support. These strategies that we have talked about will work, but they will work best if these families have an additional support. Who is their support network? Who is the professional that they have a connection with, that they trust? Where are the services and access to resources that they need in order to be the best parent that they can? So it's important that even though we talk about a common strategies, a self-care plan, anticipatory guidance, that we keep in mind that if our families are also dealing with and faced with these life challenges, that they are going to need a little bit of extra support. And how can you as a professional offer that access and that support to them? Next slide, please. Great. Just a quick highlight and a plug-in for colic. For those of us who have had colicky babies or have been in the presence of a colicky baby, that is an additional stress. We know, and the research continues to come out, that, it just happens for some babies. For some babies it's gas, but nothing has been really identified as the cause for colic crying. What's important to share with parents, it is not their fault. And it will pass. It might be up to 4 months, very difficult 4 months. So if you're working with families and somebody says, I think my baby's colicky, that is a huge opportunity for you to engage in some intensive stress relief planning. What resources do you need? Who can you call? When is it happening? So that you can map all of the different things that are happening and try to identify supports for the family during this time. Next slide, please. Okay. And I know I'm going very fast and I'm wrapping up, but it's important that we let parents know and caregivers that this stress is universal. They love their babies. We understand that this is a magic moment and period in their lives. But at the same time, crying can really trigger us and trigger our emotional responses. So it is important that even though we recognize that we can become overwhelmed at any time, that we need to know what to do in those times of high stress. That's why that prevention strategy of planning, of conversation, of talking about it before it occurs is so important. Because once it happens, if they have a plan, if they know who to call, what to do, what works for them, they will feel more confident and they will feel more prepared to address the crying periods without feeling that a fear or feeling that anger bubble up, because they know what to do, right, to take care of themselves and their baby. Next slide, please. So many of you may be familiar with this program. We really hope that you use it. It's free of charge. It's the All Babies Cry program. The website is here, allbabiescry.com. The password, ABCMA. We have used it with parents in small groups as well as in large parenting groups. It's divided into short videos showing real families. And as I mentioned, 70% of the time, dads are providing the nurturing, the care, but they talk through different strategies, how it works, what doesn't work, what may be some of the things to think about, what may be some of the feelings that parents may be experiencing during these periods of intense crying. And it provides a booklet, a 28-page booklet, again, English and in Spanish, with all of the information that I've touched upon today and strategies for further implementation. This is something that parents can access at any time, that you can use on a home visit. You can use it right on your phone, or you can use it in a class or in the office. So if you have any questions about this program, please reach out to the Children's Trust. Let us know. We will make sure that you get access to the materials and also to the videos. But we strongly believe that when parents are able to plan ahead of time, when they see other parents on video experiencing some of the same things that they're experiencing, and have a trusted professional that is able to process that information and those experiences with them, that the risks of abusive head trauma are lowered. I'm also very excited to be with my colleagues today talking about parental leave and reproductive health, because we know that when families have access to these supports, that also lowers the risks for abusive head trauma. So I appreciate your time today. You can go to the next slide, Alexandria. Thank you so much for your time, and I will be happy to take any questions now or at the end.
I think doing a Q&A section right now would be great. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anita. We're going to take about a 10-minute break. So we'll be able to, if everyone can come back at 10:43. And if you do have any questions at all, please feel free to enter them in the chat in the meantime. Thank you. So we'll see you back at 10:43. Hopefully making their way back. If you're back, please either turn on your screen, maybe even do like the raise the hand feature, or just say a nice hello in the chat. See, some people are logging back on. All right. Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for the thumbs up. Thank you so much, Anita, for that great presentation on All Babies Cry and Abusive Head Trauma. Our presenter for paid family medical leave will be joining us momentarily. So we're going to jump into the reproductive healthcare resources. If possible, would anybody be able to give me a thumbs up or shake their head on the screen to tell me if they're seeing the slides? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Awesome. So in this section, we're going to quickly go over reproductive healthcare resources in Massachusetts. So studies have shown that unintended pregnancies have been associated with worse parental behaviors, worse parenting skills than those of intended pregnancies. So for this section, we're just going to review some resources available that you can share with the families you serve in the event that they need some reproductive healthcare resources. And then one thing I do want to note is that we're not advocating for pro-choice or pro-life. We're just simply providing you with information around resources in the case that a caregiver or a person that you're working with may need those resources or assistance. So Roe v. Wade was a landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in which the court ruled that the Constitution of the United States granted the right to have an abortion in 1973. And in June of this year, the Supreme Court did overturn this decision. Something that I do want to make note of is that abortion in Massachusetts is restricted after 24 weeks, although the recent reproductive rights bill recently expanded access to abortion after 24 weeks to grave fetal abnormalities. And then something that I do want to share with all of you is that we know that restrictions to abortion access disproportionately harms women of color. The turnaround study found that women who received an abortion were less likely than those denied to experience financial hardship, receive public assistance, live in poverty, or reported poor to fair health. That study also showed that years after an abortion was denied, women were more likely to not have enough money to cover basic living expenses like food, housing, or transportation. The higher risk of childbirth were dramatically demonstrated by 2 women who were denied an abortion and died following the delivery. And for women who received the abortion, none had died from this study specifically. And then physical violence from a man involved in the pregnancy decreased for women who received abortions. And by 5 years, women denied abortions were more likely to be raising children alone without family members or male partners compared to those who had received an abortion. And this study and other resources that are going to be talked about during this section will be provided at the end of the training and in the slides that you'll get. So if you want to do more research or just read more about the studies and the resources themselves, you'll be able to do that. On July 29th, 2022, Governor Baker signed legislation to further protect access to reproductive health care services in Massachusetts. This law protects abortion providers and people seeking abortions from actions taken by other states. It requires the state's Medicaid program, known as Mass Health, and many private insurance plans to cover abortions, allow over-the-counter emergency contraception to be sold in vending machines, and requires public colleges and universities to create medication abortion readiness plans for students. All of the protections in the bill apply equally to reproductive and gender-affirming healthcare services provided or accessed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And this law also includes requirements for insurers to cover reproductive healthcare services, provisions addressing abortions performed at 24 weeks. And the measure also expands to contraception across Massachusetts. So in 2017, Governor Baker also signed the Advancing Contraception Coverage and Economic Security in Our State, so the Access Bill, into law. And this law allows eligible individuals to get a year's supply of no cost of birth control. So that includes the pill, patches, rings, and then injectable birth controls with just one trip to the pharmacy, as well as emergency contraception like Plan B at no cost with a prescription from a clinician. And then also, according to the access law, you can get, or families that you serve or any individual can get emergency contraception at no cost if it is eligible in the health insurance plan. And then I did list on the screen, there are insurances that do cover these, the access bill, that will be able to provide the birth control and Plan B listed on the screen. And then individuals do need a prescription from their clinician or a pharmacist, and then pharmacists are now actually able to prescribe emergency contraception pills through the statewide order. And the purpose of this law specifically is to make it easier for individuals to get birth control. As things get busy, as jobs change, maybe families you're working with could be working multiple jobs. So it's just there to make it easier for them to get contraception if that is something that they're looking to get. So there are some organizations across the country for sexual and reproductive health service locations. So here are some listed on the screen. So there's the Reproductive Equity Now, and this is a foundation that is committed to creating a world without barriers to access the full spectrum of reproductive health care, including abortion care. They work to make equitable access to the full spectrum and making it a reality for people regardless of their race, ethnicity, income, zip code, gender, age, immigration status, ability, sexual orientation, or religion. There is a guide to abortion care in Massachusetts on their website as its information portal to quickly get information on safe, legal, and compensation abortion care, as well as resources to access that care. It also provides information that helps people learn how to choose a provider, what they should know when they're making an appointment, how to make payments if there is any, what to expect and what to do post getting this reproductive health care. And the resources for healthcare, the pre and post support, there are general support groups on there for the Rape Crisis Center, legal services, and also suicide prevention resources. And there's also information on their website for special considerations. And then the Sexual and Reproductive Health Program, they aim to reduce unintended pregnancies and sexually transmitted infection rates by continually improving access to the high quality education, outreach, and clinical services through the statewide provider network. It provides hospitals and reproductive service locations, learning more about different types of services that can be offered. So birth control, emergency contraception, pregnancy tests, pregnancy counsel options, infertility services, HPV testing, as well as vaccines and diagnosis and any issues related to pregnancies. They also have education materials that you can order from the Clearinghouse that are about healthy relationships, birth control, overview of how to get health insurance for families planning. And that's also in multiple languages. So if you're working with a family that may not speak English, there are resources available to them as well. And there's something that I do want to mention. Recently, Google, on Google Maps, there were actually sharing locations for abortion clinics or health clinics that were actually not abortion clinics. So Google is currently working to try to remove those from Google Maps. So using some of these websites to get those resources, if anyone that you're serving needs that reproductive healthcare resources, is probably the best idea. And then if there are any questions or so someone mentioned in the chat, are we getting these slides? You will be getting these slides after the presentation today. We'll be sending you a follow-up email as well with an evaluation. But if there are any questions for abusive head trauma or any of these resources, please let us know. And then if not, we will be having our presenters for paid family medical leave joining us shortly. So I'm just going to keep the chat open. All right. All right. I don't see any more questions coming through, but I will be here in the case that there are. So we're just going to take a 5-minute break, and in 5 minutes, our presenters for the paid family medical leave will be joining us. So we want to take a nice little 5-minute break, get up, just do some nice stretching. We'll see you back here around 11 o'clock. Welcome back, everyone. Hope that you're having a great day, and thank you so much for sticking around. Our next presentation will be Navigating Paid Family Medical Leave in Massachusetts, and we have Katie Schooling here with us. Katie, did you want me to share the slides?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Okay. Let me know if that worked.
Oh, yeah, I can see him now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. So as you can see on the slides, Bill Alpine, our director, will be joining us just to answer questions, but Mary is my manager. She is out with COVID today, so I'm going to be taking over for her. So I'll do my best. Next slide. So I wanted to give you an overview of what paid family and medical leave is. Some of you may be familiar with the program, but we can sort of go into a little more depth. Talk about the eligibility. I think that's an important component of who's eligible for the program, how to apply, and then some of the benefit schedules and how to combine certain leaves that can really benefit new parents. So PFML stands for Paid Family and Medical Leave. And next slide. Basically what we are is we were put into law in 2018, contributions started in 2019, and the program actually officially launched January 1st, 2021. And it provides temporary income replacement or paid leave to eligible employees who are welcoming a new child into their family, have to deal with a serious health condition, need to take care of a family member who has a serious health condition, or for military personnel who either need to take care of a military personnel family member with a serious health condition, or actually have to sort of arrange their household if someone is deployed to active duty. This basically means that you get paid leave to a certain amount based on your salary while you're going to be out, and you have job protections. So that means that they have to give you your job when you return, so that it's the same level, same salary, same benefits, seniority, etc. Next slide. So the types of leaves available, there's basically two main buckets, family leave and medical leave. We're a little different, and sometimes this is something that not everybody understands, but it's not like federal, it's not FMLA. We have medical leave, and that's basically leave for your own serious health condition, which can include pregnancy or recovery from childbirth. It just has to be certified by a healthcare provider. And then we have what's called family leave. And any family leave to care for or to bond with your child is 12 weeks that you can take as either, doesn't matter, father, mother, non-gestational parent, for up to, basically you can take it up to the first 12 months of the child before birth, placement, or adoption. So we try to stress that, you know, you can take it, the mom can take 12 weeks after they come home with a baby from the hospital, or if they've adopted a new baby, or they can take it when the baby's 6 months old. The father can take it at any time, or the partner can take it. It really just depends on what makes the most sense. And so it's very beneficial for a new family because it gives you different times to sort of deal with the stress of having this new child in your household and adjusting and all the different stresses that go with that. So important here to emphasize is the eligibility. What are the eligibility factors for paid family and medical leave? Next slide. The four main factors are: you must work for a Massachusetts business or state agency. You don't necessarily have to be living in Massachusetts. You have to work for a Massachusetts business or state agency. So we do get some people who are out of state who work for a Massachusetts company. You need to meet the DFML's earnings requirements. Right now, that's $5,700. It's the lowest in the country. And there's a calculator we have on the site that people can use just to because I'm math challenged myself. So we encourage people to just go to the calculator and figure out your earnings requirement. And then there are certain types of employment that are exempt under PFML law. And there's a list of these on the website, but this includes municipalities, public schools, certain things like that. And this was just part of negotiations when the law was passed. And the other thing is you have to make sure that your employer does not provide a paid private plan that provides equal to greater than the state's coverage. So some companies have exempted out. They've actually applied for an exemption, shown the plan that they're going to be giving in terms of benefits to their employees. And so they're no longer part of that. But that means that they also have to give their employees equal, if not better, benefits, which includes the paid family leave for 12 weeks to bond with your child. Next slide. So this is, again, I've said I'm math challenged, I mean it. You don't have to go into great detail here, but what we try and say is for 2022, 5,700 is the current minimum threshold. That might change for 2023. That will be updated on our website, and we will make sure you guys have links to that in this slide deck. And then, did the individual earn more than 30 times their benefit rate? And so, like I said, there's a link to the calculator down there. It's all based on an individual's average weekly wage, the state average weekly wage, and what percentages of that are used. So the cap right now for 2022 is $1,084.31. That will be going up for 2023. So how to apply? There's several different ways you can apply. The main things that people need to know is they need to notify their employer 30 days in advance if possible. I mean, sometimes people do have emergencies, so they have to do it retroactively even, but 30 days in advance. They can complete an application online at paidleave.mass.gov. It's very simple, or they can call the contact center. If they don't have great Wi-Fi or they don't have a computer, they can call the contact center and they'll walk them through the application process. Then you need to provide proof of your identity. We have a long list of things that you can use to have proof of identity. It just has to be the front and the back in color. And we give tips on how to upload those or send them in if you need to. And then honestly, you just have to provide proof of your child's birth or placement. We want to emphasize that people can apply for family leave to bond with their child before a baby is born. You just have to use your due date. We are fully aware that 90% of women do not have babies on their due date. So all we do is ask, if you do have a baby, you basically have to show proof of their birth or placement. You can do that in advance too, as part of your application to complete it. And we're trying to make this process as easy as possible. So we're working on a bunch of different ways to make that simpler, but right now that's the need to complete the application. So this is just a quick timeline. We don't have to go into great depth, but it just sort of talks about what are the steps that people have to take, how long it might, an employer does have up to 10 days to respond to the application. If we don't hear a response, we automatically process it. The only way that there might be a delay in there is if we don't get the documentation in time or something's a problem with that. So then we'll reach back out to the employee to get that. And then there's usually payment sent within 2 to 4 weeks, and it can be direct deposit or a check in the mail. So we wanted to quickly touch on this because I think this is an important part of different ways that people can take advantage of the program, depending on their situation. Next slide. So there's 3 different types of schedules that people can use. And this is really this is the duration and frequency of your leave. And you can combine these. There's not like one. So continuous leave is pretty straightforward. It's a single time period of like uninterrupted days. You're gonna be out for 2 weeks from work. This is what you're doing. A reduced leave schedule is you're gonna be working on a set schedule that you've established with your employer. You're working Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 3, and the rest of the time you're off on family leave. And then intermittent leave is a little more complex. It's sort of episodes of time when you're off. It may be unexpected. This is for two really main reasons. One, for people who have chronic illnesses, especially if they've got comorbidities or things that, you really can't predict. You can't predict how you're going to react to chemotherapy. You can't predict. And it's also for people who just, things happen. So if you're on a set schedule and you're realizing that maybe your child has a medical problem and you're trying to deal with that, you can sort of try and arrange that with your employer. But either way, you have to make sure that these all jive with whatever it is your employer knows when you're going to be out. We also want to emphasize this because, again, this is sometimes something that people aren't always understanding, which is you can take medical and bonding. You can combine those. So basically, you get up to 20 weeks of medical leave in a benefit year and 12 weeks of bonding. Obviously, you can only take a 26 weeks maximum, so you can't combine those two. But the 20 weeks of medical leave can be during pregnancy or for recovery from childbirth. You just need to fill out a healthcare certification form, of which we have, you can download from your healthcare provider. And then what you do is if you combine this directly with family leave, you don't need to fill out a second application, and you don't have what's called a second waiting week. All leaves, for the most part, that first 7 days is not paid. If you combine the two, go straight from medical leave into family leave to bond with a child, you can avoid that waiting week, a second waiting week, and you don't have to fill out a second application. You just have to either in online or even calling the contacts that let people know that's what you wanted to do. And I can answer questions about that because I know people get confused.
We do have 2 questions in the chat. The first one is, can they extend more than 12 weeks if they use medical to recover from pregnancy and then 12 weeks for bonding?
Yeah, they can extend. I mean, depending on what the healthcare provider says is what's needed for the health condition. So if the healthcare provider initially says, they need 10 weeks to recover from a C-section with complications, and they feel that they need more time, then the healthcare provider will need to show that they just need an extension on their medical leave. And then they could go right from the medical leave into family leave.
Thank you. And then the next question is the leave only for childcare? Can you explain?
Okay, so for the most part, what we're talking, so we have two different types of leave. Medical leave is just for, as we said, a healthcare provider certifying that you can't work due to a medical condition, which can include pregnancy or childbirth. Regardless of medical leave or your type of pregnancy, or whether you are not pregnant, instead are adopting or getting a foster care placement, every single person eligible for PFML working for someone who's a Massachusetts company or state agency can take family leave within the first year of a child's birth or placement. So that's something to emphasize, because we're finding we don't see as much fathers taking this, or they're taking much less time. Not everybody knows about this program, but if you are eligible, you meet those 4 requirements we outlined, you can take up to 12 weeks of family leave anytime within the first year of a child's birth or placement. And it's called family leave to bond with a child for a reason. We're just assuming that's what it's for. Medical leave really should be for recovery from childbirth or during pregnancy if there's complications.
There is another question in the chat. Oh, sorry, someone to come off mic. Oh, okay. The question is, with medical care for an injured or sick family member, is it possible to get an extension longer than 12 weeks if the family member still needs care?
No, I don't believe so. I think that it maxes out at 12 weeks for family leave, regardless of what you use it for.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to enter in the chat, or you can even take yourself off mute.
Okay, so I just want to say that we have a couple extra slides here just as resources. And I won't go through them right now. I know we have. It's just to say what people need for proof of identity. You can see it's quite an extensive list. There's another question in the chat. Is caring for a family member, is the application process the same? Yeah, for the most part, the process is very much, especially if you apply online, it's the same. Basically, they ask you, they check your eligibility, they ask you what type of leave you want to take, and then depending on what you're applying for, you'll have to show, everybody has to show proof of identity regardless for obvious reasons. And then if you're applying for medical leave, like the process for to take care of a family member, you have to have a medical certification form from their doctor, their healthcare provider, to show that they need your help. And it's actually very straightforward. It's basically saying that this person cannot, they need help being driven to medical appointments. They need help just eating. They need help with this. And I mean, it's pretty, they're usually just, the doctors can pretty much on the form say, this person's going to be out of commission for the next 12 weeks. They definitely need help from this person. And then if that's submitted with the application, that's fine. Can a mom apply for medical leave if she did not work this year? It's a good question. You can apply for paid family and medical leave. I'm trying to remember the exact, I think it's up to 26 weeks after you've left your job or been released from your job. Let me double check that though. I'm not entirely positive. Did Bill get here? He may not have.
Yeah, I'm here, Katie. It's up to 26 weeks after separation. After that, you can apply. And depending on how long you've been out, the wages will be calculated accordingly in that 26-week period, meaning we look back 4 quarters. And if there's 2 quarters of wages that aren't there, then the benefit will likely be adjusted accordingly.
Thanks, Bill. Any other questions? Okay, well, like I said, there's some other resources that we don't need to go to, but there's just some links on there if you need to find out more information, and always you can call the contact center. But in general, we try and really step people through the process. So if you have any sort of direct questions that aren't being answered, please let us know. One more question I'm seeing. What can you do if your employer is non-compliant or you lose time in that 12-week period, meaning if you were only given 10 weeks? For non-compliance, we have a way to report this on our website, and we have a whole process in place. I'm not sure what you mean about lose time in the 12-week period. I don't know if he could unmute himself or not.
Hi. So, meaning if my employer, let's say I applied for the leave, and I was given the leave, but I had to come back to work earlier than the 12 weeks, and there was no recourse.
So your employer is insisting you have to come back to work earlier?
Correct.
Bill, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So under the law, we have a, I guess, retaliation or anti-retaliation provision, which, you know, depending on when it occurs, there's different results. But in essence, an employer that does anything that could be construed by the employee to be a negative action in connection with the taking of their leave can be subject to a retaliation claim by the employee. We don't handle those. Those are handled through the courts. But from the fact pattern that you're giving, if it's a forced return, that's not permissible in general terms. Again, everything is fact specific. We're not offering any legal advice here. But if an employer were to tell an employee rather, that you can only use 10 weeks, not 12, that would be potentially a form of retaliation.
Thanks, Bill. So what if you're employed for less than 1 year? I think as long as you meet the threshold, that's basically it. I mean, there's a threshold currently at $5,700 in earnings and 30 times the PFML benefit amount. And as long as that is met, it doesn't matter, how long you've worked, as long as it's for a Massachusetts company or state agency. Military leave for deployed military family members. So there's 2 types of military leave. There is military leave to take care of a family member who was injured, has a serious health condition, basically in the line of duty. I think it's in the, yeah. So, and that will again have to have a healthcare certification form from the military or from the family member's doctor. Sort of the same process. We need to verify the health condition and what's needed. The second one is called, I never get this word right, Bill, military exigency. I have a block about it, but basically it's it's military leave. It's basically family leave for someone who can take care of business matters or family matters when a family member is actively deployed or about to be actively deployed. If you take it yourself for chronic, i.e. illness, and you use it intermittently for up to 20 weeks, you would just reapply after the 20 weeks are used, as the illness will still exist? Good question. Again, all of this needs to be certified by a healthcare provider. These are the experts that we rely on to tell us what is needed. And the second part of that is there's something called a benefit year, and you can only have 26 maximum weeks of leave in a benefit year. A benefit year is basically your leave, any leave you take, doesn't have to be PFML. That benefit year starts on the clock at the Sunday of the week you first take leave. So that is really the year that we look at for the 26 weeks maximum. That said, if you're taking intermittent leave for up to 20 weeks, it depends on how many hours you take. You have to report so many hours each week. There's a phone line that you call, and there's so many hours in a week when we calculate this. So it really just depends on the individual and how much time they've actually really taken over the course of the 20 weeks. Any other questions? You're welcome. And again, I will stress, we do get a lot of individual situations. There's a lot. So please visit the website, and also, you can call the contact center if you're not getting the answers you need. But in general, we really encourage people to sort of look at the process for a whole, and you'll see that it's actually pretty straightforward once you figure out what is it you need. And then if you go to a healthcare provider, they'll be able to help you with that form to give you the types of leave and how many hours you need to take if you're taking medical leave or leave to help a family member. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Katie and Bill. And thank you again to Anita, who covered abusive head trauma. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly share a couple more slides, and then we'll give you some extra time back to your day if you don't have any more questions. All right. So here on the screen, we have a bunch of resources that were shared throughout today's training. You'll receive, again, this slide deck as well as any other resources for this training in an email that you'll get after this training. And then if we move forward, if you want to connect with the Department of Public Health or get resources on sexual reproductive health care program, or as well as the paid medical leave program, these links are listed on this slide as well. We do have an evaluation link that should be sent in the chat, but also will be in that follow-up email with these slides. We're always looking to improve our trainings to make sure that we're better serving you. So if you have the chance and time, please fill out that evaluation. And then I do just want to, again, thank the trainers for joining us here today, and as well as thanking you for taking time out of your day to join our training to learn more about abusive head trauma, paid family medical leave. Our next training is the Question, Persuade, and Refer QPR, or suicide prevention training, and that will take place on November 16th from 10 to 12 o'clock. The link for that registration is on the screen, and we can share that with you as well in the chat. If you have any other questions, please feel free to use the chat or even take yourself off mute. If not, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.